Alright, buckle up, buttercups, because if you thought you knew what a prank war was, you were wrong. So wrong. What you are about to hear, what I am about to tell you, isn't just a story. It's a legend. It's the culmination of years, and I mean years, of psychological warfare, tactical genius, and frankly, some truly unhinged acts of friendship. This is the tale of how I, your humble narrator, finally, definitively and hilariously, declared myself the undisputed champion of the greatest prank war ever waged. And trust me, it took everything I had. You see, for the better part of 2 decades, my best friend Mark and I have been locked in an escalating battle of wits, courage, and questionable ethics. Our friendship, which dates back to kindergarten when he tried to eat my crayon and I bit him, has always been defined by a certain competitive spirit. That spirit, over time, morphed into an art form. The art of the prank. We started small, as all great empires do. Whoopee cushions under chairs, salt in the sugar dispenser, the classic rubber band around the kitchen sink sprayer. Harmless, childish stuff. But then, as we grew, so did our ambition. And our budget. Mark, bless his devious heart, is a formidable opponent. He's got this innocent, almost perpetually confused look about him, which is his greatest weapon. Nobody suspects Mark. He's the guy who'd help you carry groceries, hold the door open, compliment your new haircut. And then, he'd strike. Always when you least expected it. Always with a smile. And always with a camera rolling somewhere. That's the unspoken rule of our war. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And believe me, we have a digital archive that could probably be considered a historical document by now. Our prank war really kicked into high gear sometime in college. We were roommates, which was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because we were constantly together, giving us endless opportunities. A curse because we were constantly together, giving us endless opportunities to annoy the living daylights out of each other. I remember one time, I had a huge midterm the next morning, and I was pulling an all-nighter. I'd made myself a giant pot of coffee, probably enough to fuel a small rocket. I left it on my desk, stepped out for literally 2 minutes to grab a snack, and when I came back, the coffee was gone. Not just gone, but replaced with a pot of perfectly clear, perfectly still water. And a note. A single sticky note that just said, Mark. No explanation, no apology, just Mark. I swear I saw him peeking around the corner of the hallway, trying to stifle his laughter. I ended up chugging 3 energy drinks and barely passed. That was a minor skirmish, but it set a precedent for the level of commitment we were both willing to put in. My retaliation for the coffee incident was swift and, if I do say so myself, elegant. Mark was obsessed with his pristine white sneakers. He'd clean them religiously, polish them, treat them like they were museum pieces. So one night, after he'd fallen asleep, I snuck into our room armed with a bottle of non-toxic washable blue fabric dye. I carefully, meticulously dyed every single pair of his beloved white sneakers a vibrant electric blue. He woke up the next morning, stumbled to his closet, and let out a shriek that probably woke up the entire dorm floor. His face, when he saw his collection of Smurf-colored footwear, was priceless. He tried to wash them, of course, for hours. But the dye, while washable from skin, had a surprising affinity for canvas. They stayed blue. He actually ended up wearing them for a few weeks, which was a victory in itself. He claimed he was starting a new trend. I knew better. From there, the pranks just escalated. We moved beyond simple annoyances into elaborate setups. There was the time I filled his car with packing peanuts, literally to the roof, when he was away for a weekend. He opened the door, and a white avalanche buried him. It took him hours to clean it out, and he found peanuts in his vents for months. His revenge was equally grand. I came home one day to find my entire apartment, and I mean new entire apartment, wrapped in cling film. Every single item. My couch was a giant clear cocoon. My TV, my fridge, my toothbrush, all entombed in plastic. It was a monumental effort, and it took me an entire day to unwrap everything. I still don't know where he got that much cling film. The sheer dedication was terrifying. Then came the food-related pranks. Oh, the food pranks. He once replaced all the cream in my Oreos with toothpaste. Not just any toothpaste, but that extra minty, sinus-clearing kind. I bit into one during a late-night study session, expecting that sweet, creamy goodness, and instead got a blast of Arctic freshness that made my eyes water. I almost choked. My response? I replaced all the sugar in his cereal box with salt. He poured a huge bowl of what he thought was his favorite sugary cereal, added milk, took a massive spoonful, and immediately spit it out across the kitchen. The look of betrayal on his face was a masterpiece, but the one that truly pushed me over the edge, the one that necessitated this entire, elaborate, cinematic revenge, happened about 6 months ago. We had just finished a really intense project at work. We both work in marketing, which, ironically, gives us a lot of tools for creative deception. We were celebrating, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was bragging a little, probably deservedly so, about how I had managed to pull off a particularly tricky campaign. Mark was listening, nodding, smiling, being the supportive best friend he always is. Full look, but for the wrong thing, so that when the real thing happened, he would process it as another anomaly in his newly expanded field of vision, but not connect it to anything truly dangerous. I needed more information about the Mercedes, its make, model, the slight dent. I ran the images through a specialized facial recognition program, hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver, but the tinted windows were too effective. My next step was to get closer to Elias Thorne. Not directly, but to observe his patterns, his waist, anything that could give me a clue about the nature of the data he was leaking. I needed to know what was being exchanged to predict how and when. I initiated Phase 2. Physical reconnaissance of Thorne's property. Under the cover of darkness, I moved. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting pools of amber light. I wore dark clothing, soft-soled shoes, and carried a small toolkit. My objective was not to break in, but to gather environmental intelligence. Trash cans, mailboxes, anything left outside. Thorne's house was sleek, modern, with motion sensor lights. I stayed in the shadows, moving like a phantom. His trash cans were neatly lined up, awaiting morning collection. I donned latex gloves and carefully sifted through the top layers. Empty takeout containers, shredded financial reports, too finely shredded to reconstruct. Junk mail, nothing overtly suspicious. But then, at the very bottom, beneath layers of mundane refuse, I found it. Not a document, but a small, empty plastic vial. It was the kind used for industrial-grade data storage, highly encrypted, typically containing a few terabytes of information. It was empty, but its presence confirmed my suspicions. The data leak was physical, not just digital, and it was significant. I bagged the vial, careful not to contaminate it. This was the missing piece. The exchange involved these vials. The black Mercedes was scouting for the delivery of these. The collective confirmed my analysis. _ a physical data transfer. That narrows the window significantly. These vials are expensive, specialized. They won't be exchanged lightly. The risk profile is high. _ I agreed. The stakes had just escalated. This wasn't just about preventing a data leak. It was about intercepting physical evidence. Possibly even the transfer device itself. The next few days were tense. The black Mercedes reappeared, parking closer to Thorne's house each time, its 7-minute cycle unwavering. Mark, bless his predictable soul, continued his routine. He still glanced at the black Mercedes, sometimes with a faint frown, sometimes with just a passing observation. He was still looking for a green sedan, but the black one was intruding on his peripheral vision, demanding its own category of unusual. I decided it was time to subtly reinforce the green sedan narrative, to keep Mark's focus skewed. I needed an opportunity for another casual interaction, one that would seem accidental. My chance came on a Saturday morning. Mark was washing his blue sedan in his driveway. Perfect. I donned a bright yellow running jacket, tied my hair back, and started jogging down the street carrying a water bottle. As I approached Mark's house, I feigned a stumble, catching myself dramatically. "Oh, goodness," I said, a little breathlessly, as if from the exertion. "Clumsy me." Mark looked up, a towel in his hand. A splash of soap suds clinging to his earlobe. "Oh," he said, a mild concern furrowing his brow. "You all right there, neighbor?" I straightened up, a practiced smile on my face, pushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "Perfectly fine, Mark. Just a bit clumsy this morning. My own fault for staring at the pretty flowers in Mrs. Henderson's garden instead of where I was going." I chuckled lightly, making it sound genuine. He gave a small nod, resuming a gentle wipe of his car's fender. "Glad to hear it. You're out early today." "Yes," I replied, stretching slightly, making sure my posture conveyed a casual ease. "Trying to get my run in before it gets too hot." My eyes drifted casually past his meticulously clean blue sedan, down the street, towards Thorne's house, then further still. "Funny," I said, almost to myself. The street was usually buzzing by this hour, even if subtly. Mrs. Henderson's gardener would be starting his rounds, the sound of his leaf blower a predictable morning symphony. Old Mr. Davies would be retrieving his newspaper, a ritual as old as the oak tree in his front yard. But today, a quiet hung in the air, a stillness that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. "Funny," I said, almost to myself, "how quiet it is this morning." Mark paused his polishing, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for the very sounds I was describing. "Yeah," he mused, "it is a bit. Maybe everyone's still recovering from the thunderstorm last night." Power flickered a few times at my place. I nodded, a thoughtful expression on my face. A plausible explanation, certainly. But my internal radar was humming, picking up frequencies Mark's everyday ears were not attuned to. The storm had been brief, a summer squall really, fierce for perhaps 20 minutes, then gone, leaving behind only the clean scent of rain and a few scattered leaves. Not the kind of meteorological event that would render an entire neighborhood silent and motionless for hours after dawn. Mark, bless his pragmatic heart, saw only the surface. My radar, however, was scanning deeper wavelengths, detecting an anomaly in the usual rhythm of things. I pushed away from the counter, the half-finished coffee forgotten. My gaze drifted past Mark, out the window, down the street. The sun was climbing higher, painting the brick facades with a warm, deceptive glow. It was a beautiful morning, almost idyllic, which only made the silence more jarring. "I think I will take a walk," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. Mark looked up, a smudge of polish on his cheek. "Everything all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed with mild concern. "Everything is fine," I replied a little too quickly even to my own ears. "Just need some air." The kitchen felt suddenly small, suffocating. The silence pressed in from all sides, amplifying the clinking of my own thoughts. I needed to move, to see, to understand. Mark, bless his grounded nature, simply nodded, already returning his attention to the meticulous polishing of his antique desk. He was a man of routines, of tangible tasks. Invisible anomalies rarely registered on his radar unless they physically impeded his progress. I envied that sometimes, that ability to simply exist without constantly scanning the periphery for glitches in the matrix. I grabbed my keys, a useless gesture perhaps, as I had no intention of driving, but it was a familiar ritual, a small tether to normalcy. The front door closed behind me, with a soft, almost reverent click. The sound, usually absorbed by the ambient hum of the neighborhood, now seemed to echo, a tiny disturbance in a vast, unnatural quiet. Stepping onto the porch was like entering a different dimension. The air was cool and crisp, scrubbed clean by the recent rain, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The sun, as I had observed from the kitchen window, was indeed beautiful, casting long, benevolent shadows across our manicured lawn. It was a perfect summer morning, almost painfully so. That was the problem. It was too perfect. The street, usually a bustling artery even at this early hour, was utterly deserted. No cars were parked along the curb that didn't belong there overnight. No distant rumble of a delivery truck. No chirping of birds squabbling over crumbs. No distant whir of a lawnmower, a sound that typically announced the weekend's arrival with irritating regularity. There was only the profound, encompassing silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a secluded forest. It was an absence, a vacuum, a silence that felt like a scream held in check. I walked down the 3 steps of our porch, my sneakers making a surprisingly loud crunch on the gravel path. Each step felt deliberate, amplified. I reached the sidewalk, a familiar stretch of concrete that now felt alien beneath my feet. I turned right, towards the heart of our small community, the direction that would lead me past Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses and the perpetually barking terrier of the Millers. Mrs. Henderson's roses were in full bloom, their petals dewy and vibrant. Her front door was closed, her curtains drawn. No sign of her. Usually, by now, she'd be out there with her watering can, humming some old tune, her bright pink sun hat a beacon of suburban cheer. The silence from her house was absolute. Not even a faint television murmur, which she often left on for company. Next door, the Miller's house was equally still. No terrier. Winston was a creature of habit. He greeted every passing squirrel, every delivery truck, every human with a series of frantic yaps. To hear nothing from the Millers' yard was like finding the sun missing from the sky. Their mail lay untouched on the porch mat, a small stack of flyers and a newspaper, already slightly damp from the morning dew. A faint smell of coffee seemed to linger near their closed kitchen window, a ghost of recent life. My pace quickened slightly. This was beyond odd. This was unsettling. My mind, ever eager to rationalize, tried to conjure explanations. Perhaps everyone had gone on a spontaneous neighborhood retreat. A mass exodus to a distant beach? A silent protest against something I hadn't heard about? No, that was absurd. People didn't just vanish. Not like this. I passed Mr. Henderson's garage, its door slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of his workbench, tools neatly arranged. He was always tinkering, fixing things. The garage light was off. No sound of a radio, which he usually had tuned to a classic rock station. It was like a tableau, a still life of a neighborhood. Paused mid-breath. The air grew heavier with each silent house I passed. The pretty facades, the cheerful flower beds, the neatly trimmed lawns, they all began to take on a sinister quality, like a stage set after the actors have fled. The beauty of the morning became a cruel mockery, highlighting the stark emptiness. I reached the end of our block, the intersection with Maple Avenue. This was a slightly busier thoroughfare, usually carrying the distant murmur of early morning traffic, the occasional bus, the hurried footsteps of commuters heading to the light rail station. Today, Maple Avenue was as quiet as our residential street. Not a single car passed. The traffic lights cycled through their colors, red to green to yellow, pointlessly, the rhythmic clicks the only mechanical sound I'd heard since leaving the house. The sight of the empty road, stretching out in both directions, felt like a punch to the gut. This was not normal. This was fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. My heart began to pound a little harder, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming quiet. My palms felt clammy. I instinctively reached for my phone, pulling it from my pocket. No signal, not even a single bar. I tried to make a call anyway, to Mark, to my sister, to emergency services. The phone just blinked a message. No service. It wasn't just the people who were gone. It was the infrastructure, the very ability to connect. A tremor of genuine fear snaked through me. This was no longer a curious anomaly. This was a full-blown existential crisis. What if Mark was gone too? What if he was still in the house, oblivious? Or worse, what if something had happened to him while I was out here, stupidly trying to solve a mystery by walking around? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I should go back. I should check on him. But something held me rooted to the spot. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, or a desperate need to find something, anything, that would explain this impossible situation. I had to know if it was just our little pocket of suburbia, or if this silence extended beyond. I turned left onto Maple Avenue, heading towards the small town square, which housed a few shops, the post office, and the town hall. It was a longer walk, maybe 15 minutes, but I felt an urgent need to push the boundaries of this silence. The houses along Maple Avenue were a mix of older, more stately homes and some newer townhouses. Again, the same eerie stillness. A child's tricycle lay on its side in one driveway, a bright red splash against the gray concrete. A watering hose snaked across another lawn, still attached to the spigot, a small puddle of water gleaming where it had been left to run. These were not signs of people leaving in an orderly fashion. These were signs of life suddenly, abruptly, ceasing. My breath hitched. The air, once cool and refreshing, now felt thin, difficult to draw into my lungs. My imagination, always a vivid companion, began to conjure images. What had happened? A gas leak? A new, silent weapon? A mass sleepwalking event? My mind raced through scenarios, each more outlandish and terrifying than the last. I tried to call Mark again, a futile gesture, but I needed the illusion of trying. No service, of course. The town square finally came into view, a wide expanse of green with a bandstand in the center, flanked by the brick facades of the local businesses. Usually, by now, there would be a few early risers sipping coffee outside the bakery, maybe someone walking a dog, the clatter of plates from the diner. Today, it was a ghost town. The bakery lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow through the display windows, illuminating rows of untouched pastries. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. But no one was there. No tantalizing aroma of fresh bread wafted out. Just the same clean, scentless air. I approached the bakery cautiously, my heart thumping against my ribs. I pushed the door open further. A small bell chimed, a surprisingly loud, cheerful sound that instantly died in the cavernous silence of the empty shop. The cash register was open, a few bills visible inside. A half-eaten croissant lay on a small table, a ceramic cup next to it, a faint ring of coffee still clinging to its rim. It was as if time itself had paused, mid-bite, mid-sip. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and sharp. This wasn't just people gone. This was people vanished. Narched a key. Instantly. Without a trace of struggle, without a sound. I backed out of the bakery, the chimes of the bell again echoing into the void. My eyes scanned the square. The Stodsha post office was dark, its doors locked. The small bookstore next to it was also closed. The diner, however, was a mirror image of the bakery. Lights on, door ajar, table set. A newspaper lay open on one of the booths. A crossword puzzle half finished. A faint smell of burnt toast hung in the air. This was beyond terrifying. This was surreal. I felt a growing sense of unreality, a creeping suspicion that I might be dreaming, or caught in some elaborate, cruel prank. But the sun was too warm, the air too real, the silence too absolute. I pulled my phone out again, desperately trying to get a signal, to capture a photo, to record a message. Nothing. The digital world had gone dark. My mind, for all its attempts at rationalization, now spun into more primal fears. Was I alone? Truly alone? Was Mark the only other person left? Or had I been the last one awake, the last one left behind? The thought was unbearable. A crushing weight of isolation. I started to run, a frantic, unthinking scramble back towards my street, towards Mark. The silence chased me, a palpable presence, pressing against my ears. amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing and pounding footsteps. Each house I passed, each familiar landmark, now seemed to mock me with its emptiness. The beautiful morning had become a nightmare, a brightly lit stage for an unimaginable horror. I ran past Mrs. Henderson's roses, past the Millers' silent yard, past Mr. Henderson's ajar garage door. My chest burned, my lungs ached, but I pushed harder. I had to get back. I had to see Mark. I had to know he was still there, an anchor in this sea of nothingness. Our house came into view, a welcoming beacon of normalcy. The front door was still closed, just as I had left it. I burst onto the porch, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key into the lock. Finally, with a desperate click, the door opened. I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me as if to keep the silence at bay. "Mark!" I called out, my voice hoarse, raw with panic. "Mark!" The house was quiet, too quiet. My heart lurched. No response, no sound of him moving about, no distant clatter from his workshop. Just the same oppressive silence that had permeated the outside world. I ran through the living room, past the antique furniture he so lovingly cared for, into the kitchen. Empty. The half-finished coffee was still on the counter, a cold, forgotten monument to a morning that had started so normally. The polished rag lay on the table, next to his partially disassembled antique clock. He was gone. A wave of nausea washed over me, so potent it made my knees buckle. Mark was gone. My pragmatic, grounded Mark, who saw only surfaces, who would never have believed me about the deeper wavelengths, was gone. Just like everyone else. I sank to the floor, leaning against the cool kitchen cabinets, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Tears welled up, hot and stinging, blurring the edges of the pristine kitchen. This wasn't a dream. This was real. And I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. The silence in the house was even more profound than outside. A personal, intimate silence that screamed of absence. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to make myself small, invisible. What had happened? How could an entire world simply cease to be? I forced myself to stand, my legs wobbly. I had to be logical. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed to search the house. Maybe he had just gone to the bathroom, or the basement. Maybe he was playing a joke. A very, very bad joke. I walked through the house, calling his name, my voice cracking with each desperate utterance. "Mark? Are you here? Mark?" The master bedroom was empty, the bed neatly made, just as we had left it. His side of the closet was open, revealing his meticulously organized shirts. Nothing seemed out of place. The bathroom was empty, the shower dry. I checked the guest rooms, the study, the small sunroom at the back of the house. All empty, all silent. Finally, I ventured into the basement, a place I rarely frequented. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of concrete and old books. His workshop down there was a haven of tools and half-finished projects. His favorite radio sat on a shelf, tuned to a classical station, but it was off. The workbench was clean, tools neatly hung. A faint layer of dust covered everything, suggesting no recent activity. He wasn't here. He wasn't anywhere. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a heavy weight. The reality of it settled over me like a shroud. I was the last one, or one of the last ones. The thought was so vast, so encompassing, it threatened to swallow me whole. I went back to the kitchen, drawn by the faint, lingering scent of coffee. I picked up the mug, still half full, cold to the touch. I remembered his mild concern, his furrowed brow. He had been there, just minutes ago. Alive. Real. I needed to think. What would Mark do? He would analyze. He would seek data. He would look for patterns. He would not give in to hysteria. I tried to channel his calm, his pragmatism, but the fear was a cold knot in my stomach, expanding, constricting. First, I needed to confirm the scope. Was it truly global? Or just our town? I knew my phone was useless. The internet was probably useless too if there was no service. But what about television? Radio? I went into the living room and switched on the large flat-screen TV. The screen flickered to life, showing a static-filled blue screen. No signal. Not even local channels. I tried various inputs, hoping for a DVD, player, or a streaming device to show some sign of life. Nothing. Just the endless, empty blue. I tried the old radio in the kitchen, Mark's emergency crank radio. I turned the dial, slowly, methodically, through every frequency. All I heard was static, a soft hiss of white noise that was almost more unsettling than the silence itself. No voices, no music, no news reports, no frantic emergency broadcasts. Nothing. The world had gone silent. Completely, utterly silent. I walked to the front window, peering out at the beautiful vacant street. The sun was higher now, blazing down with an indifferent intensity. The shadows had shortened. It felt like hours had passed since I stepped outside, though it was likely only 30 or 40 minutes. Time had taken on a strange, elastic quality. I needed supplies. Food, water. A way to defend myself, though against what, I couldn't imagine. The house was well stocked, but what if this lasted for days? Weeks? Forever? The idea of being the sole survivor, or one of a tiny handful, was too much to bear. My mind rebelled against it, seeking any alternative. Maybe everyone was hiding. Maybe there was a secret bunker, a designated safe zone. But how would I have missed the announcement? How would Mark have missed it? He was meticulous about current events. I decided I needed to get out again. Not to find people, not yet. But to gather information, to understand what had happened. I needed to go further, to the nearest city. It was a 20-minute drive. If the roads were clear, I could be there quickly. But the car, would it even start? Would there be gas? I had filled up a few days ago, so gas wasn't the immediate concern. But the power grid. If the power was out everywhere, would the gas pumps work? Would the car's electronics function? I walked to the garage, the internal door feeling heavy and cold. I pressed the automatic opener. Nothing. The garage door remained stubbornly shut. I pressed the button again, holding it down this time as if sheer will could force the mechanism into action. Nothing. Not a whir, not a click. Just the hollow silence of the garage. My heart sank, a heavy stone in my chest. Of course. The power was out. Everywhere. It was a foolish hope to think my garage door opener would be an exception. I stared at the heavy metal panel, a formidable barrier. There was a manual release, a red cord dangling near the motor. I knew it was there, had seen Mark use it once during a brief power outage years ago. He had grunted and strained, the door protesting with a metallic groan. He was strong. I wasn't. Not like that. But I had to try. I grabbed the cord, my hand trembling slightly. It felt greasy. I pulled. There was a clunk from the motor, a sound of disengagement. Now for the hard part. I braced myself, placing my hands on the bottom edge of the door, and pushed up. It was heavy, so incredibly heavy. My muscles screamed in protest almost immediately. I pushed harder, focusing all my dwindling energy into the effort. The door lifted an inch, then two, then sagged back down. My breath hitched. This was impossible. I tried again, this time putting my shoulder into it, using my legs for leverage. The metal grated against the track. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to rise. A foot. 2 feet. My arms burned, my back ached. But the thought of the city, of answers spurred me on. I imagined Mark standing beside me, his steady presence, perhaps offering a word of encouragement or a wry comment about my lack of upper body strength. The mental image helped, momentarily lending me a phantom strength. I managed to get it about halfway up, enough to duck under. It felt precarious, like it might crash down on me at any moment. I wedged a spare piece of lumber I found nearby into the track to hold it open, praying it would suffice. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The SUV sat there, looking perfectly normal, oblivious to the world outside. Its dark blue paint gleamed faintly in the dim light filtering in from the partially open garage door. I walked around it, checking the tires, running my hand over the cool metal. It felt like an old friend, a promise of escape. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the seat. The familiar scent of leather and faint air freshener was a small comfort. I put the key in the ignition, my hand hovering for a moment. This was it. The moment of truth. If the car didn't start, my plans were effectively over. I'd be walking, and the city was too far for that, not with the uncertainty of what lay between here and there. I turned the key. The engine coughed. A weak, reluctant cough. My heart leaped into my throat. Then, a grinding sound. A desperate attempt to catch. And then, a sputtering roar. It caught. The engine idled roughly for a moment, then settled into a steady hum. Oh, the sweet sound of it. The dashboard lit up, a constellation of indicators. The fuel gauge was exactly where I remembered it. Full. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears to my eyes. I checked the radio. Static. A faint, almost imperceptible hiss. I tried a few different stations, scanning the bands. Nothing. No news, no music, no voices. Just the dead air, a stark reminder of the silence that enveloped everything. The GPS, however, seemed to be working, albeit slowly trying to acquire satellites. It was a minor point, but it meant some electronic systems were still functional, drawing power directly from the car battery, not the grid. I backed the SUV carefully out of the garage, wincing as the lumber groaned under the weight of the partially open door. I parked it on the driveway and then wrestled the garage door back down manually, not wanting to leave my home exposed. It was even harder going down, the weight resisting my efforts, but I managed to guide it slowly until it thudded shut. The metallic clang echoed in the stillness. I got back into the SUV, securing the seatbelt. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The road ahead was an unknown. My neighborhood was just as I had left it. Empty. The houses stood like hollowed-out eyesores, their lawns growing shaggy, their windows reflecting the pale, indifferent sky. No cars in the driveways, no children's toys scattered on the grass, no signs of life, not even a squirrel scampering across the street. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of my engine. I drove slowly at first, barely exceeding 15 miles an hour, my eyes scanning every detail, every shadow. The further I got from my house, the less familiar the scenery became, and with it my sense of security waned. The streets were clear, surprisingly so. No abandoned vehicles blocking the way, no debris. It was as if everyone had simply vanished, leaving their cars neatly parked, their lives paused mid-sentence. As I approached the main road, the two-lane highway that led to the city, the sense of unease intensified. The trees lining the road were lush, green, almost vibrant, as if nature was reclaiming its territory with silent haste. But the highway itself was unnervingly bare. No oncoming traffic, no cars parked on the shoulder, just the asphalt stretching out, an empty ribbon winding through the landscape. I picked up speed, the SUV's engine a steady drone, the only sound for miles. I kept the windows up, not wanting to let the oppressive silence of the outside world fully penetrate my small, mobile sanctuary. My gaze darted from side to side, checking the fields, the distant tree lines, searching for any movement, any sign. A deer, a bird, anything. But there was nothing. The world felt held in a breath, waiting. The 20-minute drive stretched into what felt like an eternity. Each mile brought me closer to answers, or so I hoped, but also deeper into the unknown. What if the city was worse? What if it was a wasteland? Or, more terrifyingly, what if it was exactly the same as my neighborhood, just bigger, grander, and just as empty? My mind raced, trying to construct scenarios. A sudden, silent evacuation? But where would everyone go? Why no announcements, no warnings? A disease? But there were no bodies, no signs of struggle. An extraterrestrial event? My logical mind rebelled against such fantastical notions, yet what other explanation could there be for a world so utterly devoid of its inhabitants? The first sign of the city was the distant outline of its tallest buildings, a jagged silhouette against the horizon. They looked like ghost towers. He even offered to pick up celebratory pizzas and a six-pack. What a guy, right? I should have known. I should have seen it coming. He came back with the pizzas, we popped open the beers, and settled in for a night of gaming. Everything felt normal. Too normal. I was halfway through my second slice of pepperoni when I noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible smell, like something was off. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the weird combination of pepperoni and my specific brand of beer. But then, as I took another bite, the smell intensified. It was a little fishy. Very, very fishy. I looked at my pizza slice, then at Mark. He was intensely focused on the game, or at least pretending to be. His shoulders were shaking ever so slightly. I picked up another slice, held it closer to my nose. No, it wasn't just my imagination. This was definitely fish. And not a good fish. Not a fresh fish. This was the kind of fish smell you get from a forgotten bait bucket on a hot summer day. I tentatively peeled back the pepperoni. And there it was. Not just a little bit. Every single piece of pepperoni on my pizza, and only my pizza, had been carefully, meticulously replaced with thin slices of anchovies. And not just any anchovies. These were the super salty, oil-packed, extra stinky kind. He had painstakingly removed every single pepperoni, replaced it with an anchovy, and then placed the pepperoni back on top, perfectly concealing his crime. I stared at the pizza, then at Mark. He finally looked up from the game, his face a picture of feigned innocence. "What's wrong, dude? You look like you just saw a ghost." "A ghost of a fish," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. He burst out laughing, a full-bellied, uncontrollable cackle that echoed through my apartment. He literally fell off the couch, clutching his stomach, tears streaming down his face. He'd even recorded the whole thing, of course. My initial confusion, my slow realization, my dawning horror. He'd captured it all. He'd even had the foresight to bring his own, anchovy-free pizza. That night, I went to bed still smelling anchovies. My mouth felt like I'd licked a fishing boat. My stomach was churning. But more than that, my pride was wounded. Deeply wounded. This wasn't just a prank. This was a statement. This was Mark telling me, without words, that he was always one step ahead. That he could infiltrate my food, my sacred pizza, and turn it into a weapon of mass olfactory destruction. The audacity. The sheer, unmitigated gall. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, plotting 1,000 different, equally disgusting food-related retributions, a new thought began to form. This couldn't be just a simple retaliation. This couldn't be a minor inconvenience. This had to be the one, the final boss, the prank to end all pranks, the masterpiece that would, devoid of their usual shimmer of lights and activity. No smoke plumbing from industrial stacks. No glint of sunlight off glass facades. Just gray, silent monoliths. As I drew closer, the architecture became more distinct. The familiar landmarks, the office blocks, the apartment complexes. But the closer I got, the more the eerie reality set in. The highway widened into a multi-lane freeway, usually a chaotic rush of vehicles. Today, it was a vast, empty expanse of concrete. Lanes stretched out, perfectly clear, as if freshly swept. I took the usual exit into the city, the ramp curving gently downwards. The first thing I noticed were the traffic lights. Dark. All of them. Intersections were open, unregulated. It was a bizarre sight, the infrastructure of a bustling metropolis rendered utterly useless. A skeletal framework. I drove into the downtown core, my speed dropping to a crawl. The streets were lined with parked cars, rows upon rows of them. They looked abandoned, not just parked. Some had doors ajar, a coffee cup on the roof of one, a shopping bag spilling out of another. It was a freeze frame of ordinary life, abruptly halted. I parked my SUV in front of what used to be a busy coffee shop, pulling into a spot usually impossible to find. I killed the engine. The silence that descended was crushing. It was louder here, in the heart of the city, than it had been in my suburban street. A profound, echoing silence that absorbed all sound. I got out of the car, my movements stiff, my ears straining. The air was still, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and faint, like ozone after a storm. But there had been no storm. I walked towards the coffee shop, its glass front intact, the tables and chairs neatly arranged inside. A newspaper lay open on one of the tables, dated days, maybe weeks, ago. I peered inside, nothing out of place, no signs of struggle or panic, just an empty space, waiting for customers who would never arrive. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, a faint jingle from a bell above the door that sounded shockingly loud in the silence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. No reply. Just the echo of my own voice, swallowed by the cavernous interior. I stepped inside. The air was cool, stale. The coffee machines stood silent, their chrome surfaces dull. A half-eaten pastry sat on a plate on the counter, covered in a fine layer of dust. This was not a gradual abandonment. This was sudden, instantaneous. I walked deeper into the city, keeping to the main thoroughfares. The sheer scale of the emptiness was overwhelming. Skyscrapers loomed on either side, their windows reflecting the gray sky, like thousands of unblinking eyes. No lights, no movement, no sound. It was a city of ghosts, a monument to a vanished population. I passed a department store, its display windows still showcasing the latest fashion, frozen in time. A bus stood at a bus stop, its doors open, as if it had just pulled up and the driver had stepped out for a moment. But no one was waiting, no one was boarding. My primary objective was information. I needed to find a working radio, a computer, anything that could tell me what had happened. My first thought was a news station. I knew where one of the local TV and radio stations had its main offices. It was a few blocks away. The walk was surreal. Every step I took felt like an intrusion, a desecration of the profound stillness. I found myself talking to myself, whispering observations, just to hear a human voice. The sheer weight of the silence was beginning to press down on me, threatening to crush my spirit. I reached the building. It was a modern glass and steel structure, imposing and silent. The main entrance was locked, but a side door, usually for deliveries, was ajar. I pushed it open and slipped inside. The lobby was dark, the reception desk empty. Papers lay scattered on the floor, as if someone had dropped them in a hurry. I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors, guided by faint emergency exit signs. The air grew heavier, thicker, the silence more profound. I found the radio studio, its doors slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was a mess. Chairs overturned, papers strewn everywhere, microphones hanging limp. It looked like a scene of chaos, but without any actual people involved. Just the aftermath of some unseen, unheard event. I tried the equipment. The mixing board was dead. The computer screens were black. I fumbled with the power buttons, but nothing. No whir, no flicker. I checked the back of the equipment, looking for battery packs, for anything that might give it a spark of life. Nothing. The entire station was without power. Frustration surged through me, hot and bitter. This was my best bet, and it was a dead end. I leaned against a console, my head in my hands, the weight of the futility pressing down. What now? Where else could I look? I thought of the library. Perhaps there would be some written records, old newspapers, anything that might hint at a precursor to this event. Or maybe, just maybe, some kind of emergency broadcast system that ran on independent power. It was a long shot, but I was running out of options. As I made my way out of the radio station, back into the silent street, a movement caught my eye. A flicker, high up on one of the skyscrapers. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I stared, my eyes squinting against the glare of the sky. There it was again. A reflection? Or a person? My heart hammered against my ribs. A person. Could it be? After all this time, all this emptiness? I strained my eyes, trying to focus. The building was too far, too tall. The flicker was gone. Was it just the sun catching a loose pane of glass? Or was it hope playing tricks on my mind? I decided to head towards that building. It was a residential tower, apartments mostly. If someone was there, they might have seen something, heard something. Or they might be another survivor. The thought filled me with a mixture of terror and desperate longing. I started walking faster, my pace quickening, the silence of the city now punctuated by the sound of my own quickened breathing. The tower seemed to recede as I approached, an optical illusion that only added to my anxiety. Each block felt like a mile. As I got closer, I saw it more clearly. The building was pristine, its glass exterior gleaming, no visible damage. I reached the entrance, a grand lobby with revolving doors. They were stuck, of course. No power. I found a regular door, propped open with a small stone. Another sign of hasty departure. I stepped inside. The lobby was luxurious, but dusty. A few potted plants had withered, their leaves brown and brittle. The concierge desk was empty, the computer monitors dark. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice sounded small, lost in the opulent space. I looked for the elevators. Dead. Of course. I found the emergency stairwell. The thought of climbing dozens of flights of stairs was daunting, but the possibility of finding another living soul propelled me forward. I pushed open the heavy fire door and began my ascent. The stairwell was narrow, claustrophobic. Each floor looked identical, a repeating pattern of concrete and metal. I counted the floors as I went, my legs burning, my lungs aching. 5, 10, 15. I kept telling myself, just a few more. What floor was that flicker on? I had no idea. I just kept climbing, hoping I would recognize something, hear something, see something. By the time I reached the 20th floor, I was exhausted, sweat stinging my eyes. I pushed open the door onto a residential hallway. It was eerily quiet, the doors of the apartments all closed. No sounds of life, no faint music, no television, just the same profound silence. I walked down the hallway, peering through peepholes where I could, but seeing only darkness. I tried a few doorknobs. Most were locked. Then, one gave way. It opened slowly, revealing a lavish apartment, impeccably decorated, but still, utterly empty. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stepped inside, my heart thumping. The apartment was a snapshot of a life interrupted. A half-finished meal on the dining table, a book open on the sofa, a child's drawing tacked to the refrigerator. No signs of violence, no struggle, just absence. I walked to the window, the one that faced the direction I had come from. I looked out, down at the city below. From this height, it looked even more desolate, a sprawling concrete graveyard. I scanned the buildings, trying to locate the one I thought I saw the flicker on, but everything looked the same, a sea of silent, empty structures. The thought occurred to me, what if the flicker was from this very building? What if it was someone else, looking out of another window, seeing me? The idea sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly moved away from the window, feeling exposed. I needed to find something concrete. A note. A message. Something that explained this impossible emptiness. I searched the apartment, moving carefully, respectfully, as if not to disturb the ghosts that surely lingered. In the bedroom, I found a phone, a sleek smartphone, lying on the bedside table. It was a recent model, sleek and black, its screen dark. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cool glass. It was surprisingly heavy, a solid piece of technology. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, displaying a lock screen with a photo of two children, a boy and a girl, laughing in a sun-drenched park. Their faces were bright, unlined by worry, full of the innocent joy that now seemed like a relic from another age. A pang of something akin to grief, though not my own, went through me. I swiped the screen. No password. The phone opened to its home screen, a grid of familiar app icons. I checked the signal bar. Empty. No network. Of course. Why would there be? Still, a part of me had hoped for a miracle, a flicker of connection to the world that was. I opened the messaging app. A long list of conversations, mostly mundane. Family chatter, work messages, school updates. I scrolled through them, a voyeur peering into the intimate details of lives that had simply ceased. There were no frantic last messages, no desperate pleas for help. The last messages were from several days before the silence fell, ordinary texts about grocery lists, a child's forgotten homework, plans for a weekend outing. It was as if the world had paused mid-sentence, the conversation abruptly cut off. I moved to the call log. A similar story. Missed calls from family members, a few outgoing calls that had gone unanswered in the final hours. The very last entry was a call made to an emergency number, time-stamped just hours before the global silence. It had lasted only a few seconds. A hang-up. Or perhaps the line had simply gone dead. Photos. This was where the true weight of their absence settled in. Albums filled with snapshots of birthdays, holidays, school plays, family vacations. The children grew from toddlers to young adolescents across the years captured in pixels. The parents, a warm-looking couple, smiled in countless photos, their love evident in their easy glances and shared laughter. I saw them at a beach, bundled up in winter gear, celebrating a graduation. Each image was a testament to a life lived, a future anticipated. And now, nothing. Just this digital ghost. I paused on a particular photo. It showed the family sitting around a dinner table, similar to the one in the living room, but filled with food and conversation. The light was warm, casting long shadows. It was a moment of normalcy, of contentment, and it was gone. All of it. I exited the photo app and went to the Notes application. There were several entries, mostly shopping lists or reminders, but one, titled simply Urgent, caught my eye. I tapped it. The text was brief, handwritten perhaps, then typed into the phone. It read, "The sky fell. Not fire, not water. A silence. Everyone gone. They said go to the shelters. The old ones, beneath the city. But how? No one answers. The air is wrong, hard to breathe, not poison, just wrong. We tried to get to the old subway. It was sealed. No one there. We waited. For 2 days. Nothing. No lights. No sound. Just the silence. The children are scared. I am scared. We are going to try the university tunnels. Maybe there. Maybe someone. If you find this, know we tried, know we loved. The entry was dated. The date was 2 days after the last normal message, and a day before the global silence, as I remembered it. The part about the air being wrong, hard to breathe, resonated with my own experience in the first days. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, a heavier quality to the air, a faint metallic tang. I had dismissed it as panic, as the psychological effect of the emptiness. But what if it was real? What if it was a precursor? The university tunnels. That was a new lead, a direction. But how many universities were there in this sprawling city? And how many tunnels? The note was desperate, a last-ditch effort, a message cast into a void. It offered little in the way of concrete directions, only a destination type. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. A fragile, desperate purpose, but purpose nonetheless. I wasn't just wandering anymore, I had a faint whisper of a path. I put the phone back on the bedside table, careful to replace it exactly as I had found it. It felt wrong to disturb it further, to rifle through the digital remains of a family I would never know. Their story was over, their message delivered. I left the bedroom, the silence of the apartment feeling heavier now, laden with the unspoken farewells of its former occupants. The child's drawing on the refrigerator, the half-eaten meal on the dining table, the book open on the sofa. They were no longer just signs of absence. They were monuments to a sudden, inexplicable end. I moved through the living room, my gaze falling on the window again. The city below, still and lifeless, seemed to mock my newfound purpose. University tunnels, a needle in a haystack. But it was more than I had before. I needed to gather supplies. The apartment was well stocked. The pantry was full, the refrigerator still humming faintly, though most of its contents would be spoiled. I found bottled water, canned goods, dried pasta. Enough for several days, perhaps a week. I packed what I could into a sturdy backpack I found in a closet, along with a flashlight, some spare batteries, and a first aid kit. I even found a thick, warm jacket, which would be useful as the days grew colder and the city's heating systems failed completely. As I zipped the backpack shut, a faint sound reached my ears. A distant, metallic clang. It was barely audible, swallowed almost immediately by the pervasive silence. I froze, every nerve alert. Was it the wind? A settling building? Or something else? I held my breath, listening intently. Nothing. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator. A lonely testament to lingering power. My heart pounded against my ribs. I had been alone for so long. The idea of another sound, another presence, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I walked cautiously to the living room window again, scanning the silent cityscape. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple. Shadows lengthened, swallowing the lower floors of the buildings. The city was transforming, becoming a silhouette against a dramatic backdrop. The metallic clang, where had it come from? It sounded like it was from below, perhaps street level, or one of the lower floors of a nearby building. It was too indistinct to pinpoint. I decided to investigate. The university tunnels were a goal, but a sound, any sound, was an immediate mystery that demanded attention. It could be nothing. It could be everything. I made my way back to the apartment door, my hand on the cold metal knob. I hesitated for a moment, looking back at the apartment. It felt like leaving a piece of myself behind, a silent witness to a family's last moments. But I had to move. Stasis was death in this new world. I stepped out into the hallway, the sound of my own footsteps echoing unnaturally in the carpeted corridor. The silence of the building was profound, a heavy blanket that muffled all noise. I walked to the elevator, pressed the down button. Nothing. The power was out in the main systems, or at least the elevators. I had to take the stairs. The stairwell was dim, lit only by the faint light filtering in from the windows on each landing. My footsteps echoed, each tread a loud intrusion. The air grew cooler as I descended, a stale, recycled air that tasted of dust and disuse. I passed floor after floor, each apartment door closed, silent, holding its own untold stories. As I reached the lower floors, the light grew dimmer still. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam cutting a stark circle through the gloom. The metallic clang, if it was real, seemed to have come from the street level, or perhaps the underground parking garage. I pushed open the heavy door that led to the ground floor lobby. The lobby was vast and empty, bathed in the last vestiges of twilight filtering through the large plate glass windows. Dust motes danced in the fading light. The concierge desk was empty, a forgotten newspaper lying open on its surface. I moved towards the main entrance, my senses on high alert. The large glass doors were locked, but not barred. I could push them open if I needed to leave. But I wasn't leaving yet. I needed to check the source of that sound. I remembered seeing a sign for a parking garage entrance near the side of the building when I first arrived. I walked towards it, my flashlight beam sweeping across the polished floor. The air here was even colder, carrying a faint scent of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. I found the door, a heavy fire-rated steel door marked parking. I pushed it open. A blast of cold, damp air hit me. The ramp leading down into the garage was swallowed by absolute darkness. My flashlight beam pierced the gloom, revealing rows of parked cars, silent and still, their metallic bodies reflecting the light like dead eyes. The garage was a cavernous space, a concrete tomb. The clang could have come from anywhere down here. A loose piece of metal, a car settling on its suspension, an animal perhaps. But I hadn't seen any animals in the city. No birds, no rats, no stray dogs or cats. Just the silence. I began to descend the ramp, my footsteps echoing loudly. The sound of my own breathing seemed amplified. The beam of my flashlight played across the vehicles. Luxury cars, economy cars, SUVs. All abandoned. Keys still in the ignition in some, doors ajar in others. A testament to the suddenness of the event. I reached the bottom level. The air was thick with the smell of stale gasoline and concrete. I walked slowly between the rows of cars, listening, my ears strained, trying to discern any sound beyond the faint hum of my own blood in my ears. Then I heard it again, fainter this time, but distinct. A scraping sound, not a clang, but a drag, a rustle. It came from deeper within the garage, towards the far wall, where the emergency exits and service tunnels were usually located. My heart hammered. This was it. This was real. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. Part of me wanted to turn and run, to flee back to the relative safety of the apartment. But the other part, the part that craved answers, that refused to be alone in this vast empty world, propelled me forward. I moved stealthily now, trying to make as little noise as possible. The scraping sound was intermittent, like something being dragged or pulled across the concrete floor. It was slow, deliberate. I rounded a corner, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, and then I saw it. A figure. It was hunched over, its back to me, near a stack of old tires. It was clearly human, or at least humanoid. It was wearing what looked like heavy, grimy work clothes. It was manipulating something on the ground, and the scraping sound emanated from its actions. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. After all this time, after weeks of absolute solitude, another person. The sight was almost too much to comprehend. The figure suddenly straightened up, turning its head slowly, as if sensing my presence. It was tall, gaunt, its face obscured by shadow and grime. But its eyes, they caught the beam of my flashlight, reflecting it back with an eerie, unsettling glow. They were wide, unblinking, and seemed to hold an ancient, terrible hunger. It took a step towards me, then another, slowly, deliberately. My mind screamed. This was not a rescue. This was not a reunion. This was something else. Something predatory. I reacted instinctively. I dropped my backpack, pulling out the small crowbar I had taken from the apartment. It was a flimsy weapon, but it was all I had. "Who are you?" I wanted to shout, but my voice failed me. My throat was dry, constricted by fear. The figure continued to advance, its gait uneven, a shuffling, dragging movement. As it drew closer, I could make out more details. Its clothes were torn and filthy. Its skin, where visible, was pale and stretched taut over prominent bones. Its mouth was slightly agape, revealing what looked like blackened teeth. This was not a survivor. This was something changed. Something monstrous. A deep guttural moan escaped its throat. It was not a human sound. It was a sound of primal pain, of unreasoning hunger. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the approaching horror. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst through my chest. The crowbar felt like a feather in my shaking hand. The creature lunged. It was surprisingly fast despite its shuffling gait. I ducked, swinging the crowbar wildly. It connected with something, a sickening thud, and the creature stumbled, letting out another distorted moan. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, scrambling back the way I came, my boots skidding on the concrete. The sound of its pursuit, a heavy, uneven dragging, echoed behind me. It was gaining. Panic lent me speed. I didn't look back, I just ran, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I fumbled for the door to the stairwell, yanked it open, and burst through, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't bother to lock it. I just ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, praying the creature couldn't follow. I didn't stop until I reached the 10th floor, my legs shaking, my body drenched in sweat. I leaned against a wall, gasping for breath. The image of those glowing eyes burned into my mind. What was that thing? What had happened to it? The silence of the stairwell was no longer comforting. It was menacing, filled with the phantom echoes of that guttural moan. I had found another living thing? Yes, but it was not human. Not anymore. I continued my ascent, driven by a primal need for higher ground, for safety. I didn't stop until I reached the top floor, the penthouse level. I knew that apartment was likely locked, a fortress compared to the one I had just fled. I tried the door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, my crowbar still clutched in my hand. The penthouse was even larger than the apartment below. A sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the desolate city. It was dark, the last light of dusk fading from the sky. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The air here was still and cool, carrying a faint scent of expensive upholstery and dust. This apartment felt different. More opulent, certainly, but also more preserved. As if its occupants had left with more care, or perhaps had never left at all. I moved cautiously through the living room, my flashlight beam sweeping across plush sofas, a grand piano, shelves filled with books and art. This was a place of wealth, of cultured living, and, like all the others, utterly abandoned. I found a master bedroom, even larger than the one below. The bed was neatly made, a thick comforter folded at its foot. On the bedside table, beside a stack of literary novels, was a small, ornate wooden box. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in this world, drew me to it. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a silver locket. I picked it up. It was warm to the touch, as if recently worn. I pressed the clasp. It sprang open, revealing 2 miniature portraits, a stern-looking man and a beautiful, serene woman. They looked like people from a different era, their faces etched with a quiet dignity. Beneath the locket was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. I carefully unfolded it. The script was elegant, flowing, written in faded ink. It began without a greeting, as if a continuation of an ongoing thought. The whispers grow louder each night, the air heavy. They say the veil thins, that the old world is receding, making way for something new. I do not fear it as much as I once did. My beloved, your spirit has already crossed. I feel its pull. The others, they scream and fight against the change. They barricade their doors, they cling to their machines. But the machines are silent now. Their voices, once so loud, are but fading echoes. The transformation is inevitable. We are merely vessels. The new dawn brings not light, but a deeper understanding. A merging. Do not resist, for resistance is pain. Embrace the silence, for in it the true voice of the world speaks. I go to meet it now, not in fear, but in acceptance. The tunnels call, not the tunnels of man, but the deep, ancient passages beneath the earth, where the roots of the world intertwine. There, we shall become one. The note was unsigned, undated, but its message was chilling. The whispers, the thinning veil, the transformation. It sounded like madness, a descent into some esoteric delusion. But in this world, where reality itself had fractured, who was to say what was madness and what was truth? The mention of tunnels again, but this time not the university tunnels. The deep ancient passages beneath the earth. The roots of the world. It sounded like something out of a myth, a dark fairy tale. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, far worse than the fear of the creature in the parking garage. That creature was a physical threat. This note hinted at something metaphysical, something far grander and more terrifying than a mere plague or disaster, a fundamental shift in reality itself. I carefully refolded the parchment and placed it back in the box, closing the locket over it. This was not a message of hope or guidance. It was a testament to a different kind of disappearance, a willing surrender to an unknown force. I moved to the large windows, looking out at the city. The last light had completely faded, and the metropolis was now a black void, punctuated by the occasional flicker of a distant electrical short or a dying fire. The moon, a sliver of white, hung high in the sky, casting a ghostly pallor over everything. The creature in the garage. Was it one of those who had resisted? Or one who had embraced the change, but imperfectly, becoming something twisted and hungry? The note spoke of merging, of becoming one. What if that was the state I had just encountered? A failed merging? I needed to get out. Not out of the city, not yet. But out of this gilded cage, this observation deck of a dying world. The creature in the garage, the note in the locket, the silence outside. They were all threads leading to a truth I was compelled to unravel. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum, echoing with unanswered questions. My gaze drifted from the moonlit cityscape to the scattered remnants of my life in the penthouse. A half-eaten meal on the dining table, a book open face down on the sofa, a jacket slung over a chair. These were artifacts of a time that no longer existed. A life that had vanished as completely as the people who once lived it. The very air felt different, thinner, charged with an invisible current of dread. The note. A fundamental shift in reality itself. What did that even mean? Was render all future attempts futile. I needed to not just win the war, but redefine the very concept of victory. I needed to make him question everything he thought he knew about pranking. I needed to create an experience so epic, so unforgettable, that it would become the stuff of legend within our friend group. And yes, it would absolutely be filmed. Every glorious second. The next morning, the anchovy trauma still fresh in my mind, I started brainstorming. I knew it had to be big. Not just big in scale, but big in emotional impact. It couldn't just be messy or annoying. It had to be a story. A journey. Something that would unfold over time, with multiple layers, and a grand, spectacular finale. I wanted cinematic. I wanted dramatic. I wanted a feature film of a prank. My first ideas were, admittedly, a bit cliché, replacing his car with a similar, but comically small children's version, filling his office with balloons. Standard stuff. But that wasn't enough. Mark deserved more. He deserved a prank that would challenge his perception of reality, that would make him doubt his own sanity for a few precious, horrifying moments. And then, when the reveal came, it would be an explosion of pure, unadulterated hilarity. I spent weeks, maybe even a month, just thinking. I carried a small notebook with me everywhere, jotting down ideas, scenarios, potential props. I started looking at the world differently. Every interaction, every news story, every mundane object became a potential component of the ultimate prank. I even started watching heist movies and spy thrillers, not for entertainment, but for inspiration on misdirection, timing, and elaborate setups. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was an operation, a covert mission. The core concept started to solidify after a particularly frustrating day at work. We were dealing with a client who kept changing their mind, making us redo entire campaigns. The idea of something being constantly in flux, something appearing and disappearing, something that defied logic, began to appeal to me. I wanted to create a situation where Mark would be convinced something absolutely impossible was happening. Something that would make him question his memory, his judgment, and maybe even his own sanity. And then, it hit me. Like a lightning bolt of pure genius. The perfect blend of misdirection, psychological torment, and cinematic flair. It involved his car. Oh yes, his car was going to be central to this. Not just filling it with peanuts, not just wrapping it in cling film, but something far, far more elaborate. Something that would make him believe his car was, well, you'll see. But it was going to be a multi-stage event, with different phases of confusion and escalating absurdity. I knew I couldn't pull this off alone. This wasn't a solo mission. This required a team, an A-team if you will. I needed people I could trust implicitly, people who understood the gravity of the situation, and most, a physical transformation of the world, or a perceptual one? Had the laws of physics themselves been rewritten, or merely suspended? Had the very fabric of existence frayed, unraveling the threads that bound us to a perceivable reality? The thought was a cold, creeping dread that coiled in my stomach, far more terrifying than any monster. If the rules were gone, then anything was possible. And if anything was possible, then nothing was certain. My mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic and reason, felt like it was being stretched on a rack, each synapse screaming in protest against the impossible. This penthouse, this gilded cage, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb, a monument to a past that had simply ceased to be. To stay here was to succumb to the silence, to let the unanswered questions fester until they consumed me. The creature in the garage, the note in the locket, the deafening quiet outside, they were not just threats. They were invitations. Invitations to a truth I was compelled to unravel, a journey I had to undertake, even if it led me to the edge of sanity. My gaze fell upon the locket, still clutched in my hand. Its cool metal felt like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The note. It was time. My fingers, trembling slightly, worked at the tiny clasp. It was old, intricate, designed to protect its secret. With a soft click, it sprang open. Inside, nestled against the faint imprint of a forgotten photograph, was a sliver of paper, folded with meticulous care. It was smaller than I had anticipated. Perhaps a single line, a cryptic utterance. I carefully unfolded it, my breath held captive in my chest. The script was elegant, familiar yet unsettling. It read, "The veil thins." That was all. 3 words. 3 words that resonated with an ancient, almost mystical quality. The veil thins. Not a warning, not an instruction, but an observation. An explanation, perhaps, for the fundamental shift. What veil? The veil between worlds? Between realities? between what we perceived as real and what truly was. The words sparked a chilling memory, a half-forgotten lecture from a fringe philosophy course I had taken years ago, about ancient cultures and their belief in permeable boundaries between dimensions, moments when the mundane gave way to the extraordinary. Was that what this was? Not a collapse, but a revelation? A stripping away of the illusion, exposing a deeper, more unsettling truth? The air in the penthouse seemed to grow colder, charged with the weight of that simple phrase. The veil thins. It suggested a gradual process, culminating in this sudden, inexplicable emptiness. Or perhaps the thinning itself was the event, and the emptiness its immediate consequence. I refolded the note, tucking it back into the locket and snapping it shut. It felt heavier now, imbued with a terrible significance. My resolve hardened. I had to go. I had to see what lay beyond the thinning veil. I began to move, gathering only the essentials. A sturdy backpack, previously used for weekend hikes, now repurposed for an unknown expedition. A powerful flashlight, its beam a meager defense against the encroaching darkness of the unknown. A multi-tool, a compact first aid kit, a bottle of water, and some high-energy bars. Practicalities in a world that had ceased to be practical. I strapped a heavy, ornate letter opener, a gift from a long-lost colleague, to my belt. It was more a symbolic gesture of defense than a true weapon, but its cold steel offered a small comfort. My apartment, once a haven of organized chaos, now felt like a stage set after the actors had vanished. I took one last look at the moonlit cityscape, the silent sentinel of a world that had forgotten how to breathe. The familiar skyline, usually a tapestry of twinkling lights and distant hums, was now a monochrome silhouette against a sky too vast, too empty. The journey down from the penthouse was an exercise in surrealism. The elevator, usually a seamless glide, felt like a descent into a forgotten realm. Its polished steel gleamed under the emergency lighting, reflecting my own pale, determined face. Each floor passed in a silent blur, a testament to the lives that had once filled these spaces. I imagined them, going about their routines, oblivious to the impending shift, to the thinning veil. Had they felt anything? A tremor, a chill, a sudden disorientation? Or had they simply ceased? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the ground floor, the sound echoing unnaturally in the cavernous lobby. The grand entrance, usually bustling with security personnel and residents, was deserted. The massive glass doors, usually a portal to the city's pulse, now framed only an inky blackness, punctuated by the distant, unblinking eyes of streetlights. I bypassed the main exit, heading straight for the subterranean garage. That was where the creature was. That was where I had to pass. The air grew cooler, heavier, tinged with the metallic tang of concrete and the faint, unsettling scent of ozone. The garage was a vast, multi-level labyrinth, usually a symphony of roaring engines and screeching tires. Now it was a mausoleum of metal. Rows upon rows of abandoned vehicles, frozen in place, some with doors ajar, others with lights still faintly glowing, their batteries slowly dying. It was a tableau of sudden, universal departure. And there it was. The creature. It was larger than I had remembered, or perhaps my fear magnified its presence. It lay curled amidst the abandoned luxury sedans, a dark, amorphous mass that seemed to absorb the dim emergency lights. Its form was unsettlingly organic, yet alien. It was not a beast of fur and bone, but rather of shifting, obsidian-like plates that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, or perhaps reflect the ambient gloom in a way that defied physics. It had no discernible head or limbs in the conventional sense, but rather sinuous, tentacle-like appendages that lay coiled around its central mass, occasionally twitching with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Its surface was not smooth, but a mosaic of fractal patterns, constantly reforming, like a living tessellation. And then I saw them. The eyes. Not eyes in the biological sense, but rather clusters of polished obsidian facets embedded within the plates, reflecting the garage lights in 1,000 miniature points. They were not focused, not looking at me directly, but seemed to encompass everything, radiating an ancient, indifferent awareness. A low hum, almost subliminal, emanated from its mass, vibrating through the concrete floor and into my bones. It was not a sound of distress or aggression, but one of pure, resonant energy. It was a living hum, a fundamental tone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to retreat, to hide. But the veil thins. The creature was a part of it, a manifestation. To understand the shift, I had to understand this thing. I took a cautious step forward, then another. My letter opener felt like a child's toy against such a colossal, alien presence. The creature did not stir, its obsidian facets merely reflecting my approach, not acknowledging it. It was as if I was a ghost, an inconsequential ripple in its profound existence. I circled it slowly, keeping a wide berth, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, momentarily illuminating the strange, shifting patterns on its hide. The air around it felt different, colder, yet also strangely charged, like standing near a massive, silent generator. As I drew closer to the edge of the garage, where the ramp led up to the street, I noticed something. One of its tentacle-like appendages, thicker than the others, lay stretched out, almost like a path, and at its very tip, resting on the cold concrete, was a single, iridescent scale. It was the size of my palm, shimmering with all the colors of the spectrum, yet also completely transparent. It looked like a piece of solidified starlight. It was an offering. Or a clue. My scientific curiosity, a lifelong companion, wrestled with primal fear. I knelt, slowly, carefully, my eyes never leaving the creature. It remained still, its humming resonance the only sign of its life. I reached out a trembling hand and picked up the scale. It was feather-light, cool to the touch, and pulsed with a faint internal light, mirroring the patterns of the creature's skin. As my fingers closed around it, a jolt, not of pain, but of pure information shot through me. Images, sensations, fleeting glimpses of something vast and incomprehensible. A sense of immense age, of cosmic distances, of a process that unfolded over eons. It was not a language, but a feeling, a profound understanding of what the veil thins truly meant. It was a process of dissolution, a slow, inevitable merging of realities, and this creature was not a monster, but a harbinger, a living bridge, or perhaps a byproduct. The jolt subsided, leaving me breathless, disoriented. The scale pulsed gently in my hand, now feeling like a part of me. The creature remained inert, its hum unwavering. It had given me something, shown me something. It had not been hostile. It had been informative. With the iridescent scale clutched tightly in my hand, I rose. The path was clear. The creature was not a barrier, but a gatekeeper, and it had allowed me passage. I walked towards the ramp, my steps more confident now, my purpose sharpened. The hum of the creature followed me, a deep, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate with the very structure of the building. I pushed open the heavy emergency exit door that led to the street. It groaned on its hinges, a loud, jarring sound in the pervasive silence. The night air hit me, cool and still, carrying no scent of exhaust fumes, no distant chatter, no urban perfume. Just the clean, crisp smell of empty space. I stepped out into the street. The city was a ghost. The towering skyscrapers, usually ablaze with light, were now dark monoliths against the moonlit sky. Only scattered emergency lights, like dying embers, dotted the landscape. The streetlights, those unblinking eyes from my penthouse window, seemed to cast longer, sharper shadows, creating an eerie chiaroscuro effect. Cars were abandoned haphazardly, some with doors flung open, others with headlights still on, their beams cutting through the gloom like desperate fingers. A taxicab sat half-mounted on the curb, its meter still ticking, frozen in its last fare. A child's tricycle lay on its side near a bus stop, a silent testament to a life suddenly interrupted. The silence was the most profound. It was not merely an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on everything. It felt wrong, unnatural. The city was designed for noise, for movement, for the ceaseless symphony of human activity. Without it, it was a hollow shell, an enormous stage without its players. I stood in the middle of the street, turning a slow circle, taking it all in. My breath plumed in the cool air, the only visible sign of life. The iridescent scale in my hand pulsed faintly, a small, vibrant star against the overwhelming desolation. The veil thins. It wasn't just people who had vanished. The very essence of the city seemed to have been leached away. The air, though clean, felt thin, almost brittle. The moonlight, usually softened by the city's glow, was stark and unforgiving, painting everything in shades of silver and deep shadow. The colors of the abandoned cars, the street signs, the storefronts, seemed muted, as if drained of their vibrancy. My immediate goal was to find information. My apartment had been a dead end. The creature, a source of cryptic insight. The city itself had to hold clues. Where would I go? A communications hub? A data center? A library? My mind raced, trying to impose logic on the illogical. The nearest public terminal was a few blocks away, in the Central Plaza. It was a long shot, but it was a starting point. Any residual data, any message, any flicker of digital life might provide an answer. I began to walk, my footsteps echoing loudly on the deserted pavement. Each sound I made seemed amplified, an intrusion in the sacred silence. I passed storefronts, their displays still set, mannequins staring out with vacant eyes, a cafe, its chairs overturned, a half-empty cup of coffee still on a table, a newspaper stand, headlines screaming about mundane political scandals, oblivious to the cosmic shift that had just occurred. It was a museum of the recent past, a frozen moment in time. As I walked, I noticed the first subtle anomaly beyond the emptiness, a streetlight, not merely broken, but wrong. Its light was not the usual yellow or white, but a soft, pulsating violet, casting strange, elongated shadows that seemed to writhe with an unseen energy. It was beautiful, unsettling, and utterly alien. I paused beneath it, the violet glow bathing me, making my skin feel strangely tingly. The scale in my hand pulsed brighter, mirroring the streetlight's strange hue. This was it. The subtle alterations. The thinning veil was not just about disappearance, but about transformation. The world was changing, not just emptying. Further on, I saw a building, a modern glass and steel structure that housed corporate offices. But its facade was no longer smooth. It was covered in a network of fine, crystalline veins, like frost patterns, but glowing with a faint, internal luminescence. They snaked across the glass, intricate and geometric, a new skin growing over the old. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly impossible. I touched one of the crystalline veins. It was cool, smooth, and hard, like quartz, but it hummed faintly under my touch, a miniature echo of the creature in the garage. The scale in my hand vibrated in response, a silent conversation between alien elements. This wasn't just an event, it was a process. A new reality was bleeding through, overlaying the old, consuming it. The veil thins. It made a horrifying, beautiful sense. The silence of the city, once merely an absence, now felt like a canvas for these strange manifestations. Each glowing vein, each violet light, each shimmering reflection was a brushstroke in a new, incomprehensible masterpiece. My sense of dread was now mixed with a profound, almost spiritual awe. The scale in my hand felt like a key, a translator for this new language of reality. I continued my trek towards the Central Plaza, my heart a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I was no longer just a survivor. I was an explorer, charting the contours of a world reborn, or perhaps undone. The Central Plaza was a vast, open space, usually teeming with life. Now, it was a grand stage for the moon. The monumental statues of historical figures cast long, dramatic shadows. The public terminal, a sleek, interactive monolith of polished chrome and glass, stood at its center. Its screens, usually a riot of advertisements and public information, were blank, dark mirrors reflecting the desolate plaza. I approached it, my hope dwindling with each step. If the power grid was down or the network severed, it would be useless. But as I drew closer, I noticed a faint, pulsing light emanating from one of its screens. Not a normal light, but the same violet hue I had seen in the streetlight. My heart quickened. A flicker of life. A sign. I reached the terminal. The screen was not completely dark. A single, small symbol pulsed in the center of the violet glow. It was a complex geometric pattern, vaguely familiar, yet utterly alien. It was the same fractal pattern I had seen on the creature's hide, and on the crystalline veins of the building. I reached out and touched the symbol. The screen flared with an intense violet light, momentarily, away importantly. People who could keep a secret. Especially from Mark, who, despite his pranking genius, has a surprisingly good nose for when something is brewing. My first recruit was Sarah. Sarah has been a mutual friend since high school, and she's a master of logistics. She plans events, organizes charity drives, basically runs her life like a well-oiled machine. She's also incredibly discreet and has an almost pathological hatred for Mark's pranking skills, having been a victim herself on several occasions. The last time, he'd replaced all her shampoo with bright pink hair dye just before a big job interview. She showed up with a shocking magenta streak in her hair. She was in. More than in, she was enthusiastic. Her eyes gleamed with a thirst for vengeance that almost matched my own. Next up was David. David is our tech guy. He's the one who can rig anything, code anything, make anything happen with wires and circuits. He builds custom drones, programs smart home systems, and once, for a Halloween party, created a holographic ghost that floated through his living room. He's a bit of a recluse, but when you offer him a challenge, especially one involving elaborate technical trickery, he's all in. I pitched him the basic idea, and his eyes lit up. He started talking about remote triggers, hidden cameras, and synchronized effects before I'd even finished explaining the first phase. I knew I had my special effects wizard. Finally, there was Emily. Emily is an actress. Not a famous one, but a damn good one. She's done local theater, commercials, and has an uncanny ability to improvise and adapt to any situation. She's also incredibly persuasive and can play almost any role convincingly. I needed someone who could interact with Mark, subtly guiding him, manipulating situations, and delivering key lines without breaking character. She was the final piece of the puzzle. When I told her the plan, she didn't just agree. She started outlining character motivations and potential dialogue options. I knew then that this wasn't just a prank. It was going to be a performance, a cinematic masterpiece. With my core team assembled, we began to meet in secret. My apartment became our war room, littered with whiteboards, diagrams, and endless post-it notes. We mapped out every possible scenario, every contingency. We assigned roles, drew up timelines, and even created a budget. This wasn't cheap, by the way. This level of revenge requires significant investment. But it was worth every penny. The first phase of the prank involved establishing a false sense of security. We needed Mark to feel completely relaxed, completely unaware, before we pulled the rug out from under him. So for about a month, I was unusually nice to him. I'd offered to buy him coffee, help him with small tasks, even compliment his questionable fashion choices. I bit my tongue so hard I almost drew blood, but it was crucial. He started to wonder if I'd finally given up on the prank war. He'd even joke, "You finally surrendered, didn't you? You know you can't beat me." And I'd just smile, a little too sweetly, and say, "Maybe, Mark. Maybe." All the while, behind that sweet smile, the gears were turning. David was busy creating custom software and miniature devices. Sarah was sourcing obscure props and coordinating logistics with various unwitting accomplices. Emily was rehearsing her lines and developing her character arcs, and I was the puppet master, pulling the strings, watching Mark, learning his routines, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Our target was Mark's car, a perfectly ordinary, slightly beat-up sedan that he cherished like a child. It was his daily commuter, his weekend adventure mobile, his sanctuary. And it was about to become the stage for his greatest humiliation. The first step was subtle, almost imperceptible. David installed a small, remotely controlled GPS tracker and a few miniature cameras in the car. These weren't just for tracking, they were for a very specific purpose that would become clear later. We also subtly altered a few things in his car. A slight adjustment to his seat position, a barely noticeable change in the radio presets, a small, almost microscopic scratch on his dashboard that he would eventually notice, but wouldn't be able to explain. These were psychological seeds designed to plant tiny doubts. Then came the first active phase. We decided to target his commute to work. Mark has a very specific route, almost ritualistic. Every morning, he takes the same roads, stops at the same coffee shop, parks in the same spot. It was a perfect canvas for our art. One Tuesday morning, as Mark was making his way to work, we initiated Phase 1. David, monitoring the GPS, waited until Mark was on a particular stretch of road, a quiet residential street with very little traffic. At that precise moment, Emily, disguised as a slightly eccentric, overly friendly neighborhood watch volunteer, approached his car at a stop sign. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing a reflective vest that looked vaguely official. Mark, being the polite person he is, rolled down his window. Emily leaned in, a warm, slightly breathless smile on her face. "Oh, excuse me, sir. So sorry to bother you. Just conducting a quick survey for the neighborhood association." She gestured vaguely at a house down the street. "We're just trying to get a feel for traffic patterns, for safety." She asked him a few innocuous questions. "Do you live around here? How often do you use this street? What do you think of the new speed bumps?" Mark, ever the good citizen, answered patiently. Then came the critical part. She squinted at his car, then back at her clipboard. That's interesting." She tapped her pen. "Your car? It's a blue sedan, right?" Mark looked at his car, then back at her. "Yeah," he said, a little confused. "It's a blue sedan. Why?" Emily frowned dramatically, then chuckled. "Oh, never mind. Just a silly mistake on my part. We had a report of a green sedan, in this exact spot, at this exact time, every day. Must be another car that looks similar." She laughed again, a little too loudly. "Anyway, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day." Mark drove off, undoubtedly shrugging off the strange encounter. But the seed had been planted. A blue sedan, not a green one. A blue sedan, not a green one. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of satisfaction ran through me as Mark's car turned the corner and disappeared from view. The street was quiet again, the afternoon sun casting long, lazy shadows across manicured lawns. I let the dramatic frown melt from my face, replacing it with a genuine, if fleeting, smile. Phase 1 complete. I watched for another minute, just to be sure. No lingering curiosity, no sudden U-turn. Mark was exactly as I had profiled him, compliant, a creature of habit, and utterly unsuspecting. He would be home soon, probably already forgetting the strange woman with the clipboard, dismissing her as another one of those neighborhood quirks. But the seed, once planted, would germinate. It was a subtle thing, a whisper of doubt, a momentary flicker of attention towards something that wasn't there, or perhaps was supposed to be there. I tucked the clipboard under my arm, the pen still clipped neatly to its side. The fake survey sheets, filled with meaningless demographic questions and fabricated data, felt heavy and absurd. My real work was far more intricate, far less visible. I walked back down the street, not to the house I had just pretended to be associated with, but to a nondescript white van parked a block over, partially obscured by a towering oak. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, a welcome relief from the late summer heat. The van was my mobile command center, disguised as a service vehicle. Monitors glowed softly, displaying feeds from the 3 micro cameras I had strategically placed along Mark's route. One was disguised as a bird feeder in Mrs. Henderson's yard, another as a reflective strip on a utility pole, and the third, the most crucial, embedded within the cap of a fire hydrant directly across from Mark's driveway. I settled into the swivel chair, pulling off the baseball cap and running a hand through my hair. On the main monitor, I replayed the last few minutes of the interaction. Mark's polite confusion, his slight hesitation, my exaggerated frown, the forced laugh. It all played out perfectly. His eyes, for a split second, had flickered from his blue car to an imaginary green one. That was all I needed. I opened a secure audio channel. The faint hiss of static preceded a calm, modulated voice. _ status report. Nightingale. _ Phase 1 complete, I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the theatricality I had just employed. The target has been engaged. Misdirection planted. _ excellent. Any anomalies? _ none. He accepted the premise without question. His profile holds. _ good. Proceed to phase 2. Maintain observation. Look for any green shoots. _ A wry smile touched my lips. Will do. Nightingale out. I leaned back, watching the silent playback. The green sedan was a ghost, a fabrication, but it served a vital purpose. Mark was not the target. Not directly, anyway. Mark was the lens, the unwitting instrument through which I hoped to observe the true target. My objective was not to confuse Mark, but to use his confusion to highlight something else, something hidden in plain sight. The real target, or rather the critical piece of information, revolved around a specific vehicle. Not a green sedan, but the concept of a specific, regularly appearing, oddly colored sedan was meant to prime Mark. To make him observant, yes, but observant in the wrong direction. To create a psychological smokescreen. My mission was delicate. I was operating under the radar, a ghost within the system. The organization I worked for, known only as the Collective to its operatives, dealt in information, in the unseen threads that connected disparate events. We didn't seek power. We sought balance, often by subtly nudging events back onto a more favorable course. This particular operation was about preventing a significant data leak, a breach that could destabilize several key financial markets. The leak was tied to a specific individual, an analyst named Elias Thorne, who lived a few blocks from Mark. Thorne was meticulous, paranoid, and extremely cautious. He had a dead drop system, a series of coded exchanges that were almost impossible to track. Almost. Our intelligence suggested that one of these exchanges involved a specific vehicle, a specific time, and a specific route. The problem was, we only had fragments, a time window, a general area, and a vague description of the vehicle as unusual. My task was to narrow it down, to identify the vehicle and the method of exchange, without alerting Thorne or his contacts. Mark, with his predictable routine and his position as a casual observer of the street, was perfect. He was the ideal, unwitting witness. By planting the idea of a green sedan, I was creating a distraction, a red herring for his subconscious. If he started looking for green sedans, he would inevitably notice other vehicles. And if one of those vehicles was the truly unusual one, his mind, prepped to identify an anomaly, would register it. But he would likely dismiss it, or connect it to the green sedan narrative I had fed him. That dismissal was key. It allowed me to observe his reactions, his slight pauses, his glances, without him ever realizing he was part of an elaborate information-gathering scheme. The next few days were a blur of observation. I maintained my position in the van, occasionally moving it to different spots to avoid suspicion. I became intimately familiar with the rhythm of Mark's street, the dog walkers, the mail carrier, the school bus, the elderly woman who watered her prize-winning roses at precisely 4:17 p.m. And Mark. He drove past the bird feeder camera each morning at 7:45 a.m. on his way to work. He returned at 5:30 p.m. His blue sedan was unremarkable, a perfect camouflage. But now, I noticed something new. On the third day after our encounter, as he pulled out of his driveway, his gaze lingered for a fraction of a second longer than usual on a parked car across the street. It was an old, faded beige sedan, nothing special. But the glance was there, a subtle shift in his routine, a ripple in the predictable pattern. Later that afternoon, a delivery truck, a standard white panel van, made a stop 2 houses down from Mark. As the driver unloaded a package, Mark, returning from work, slowed slightly, his eyes sweeping over the streetscape. His gaze paused, almost imperceptibly, on the delivery van, then drifted. Was he looking for a green sedan? Or was he taking in the details of everything, the planted seed making him generally more observant? It was impossible to tell for certain, but the slight deviations were enough. The system was working. My attention wasn't solely on Mark. Elias Thorne's house was further down the block, a modern, minimalist structure that stood out amidst the more traditional homes. Thorne himself was a ghost. I rarely saw him. He worked from home, a financial analyst with a reputation for being reclusive. My intel suggested he communicated primarily through encrypted channels and physical dead drops, the latter being the focus of my current operation. The vehicle exchange was the weak link. I spent hours analyzing the camera feeds, fast-forwarding, rewinding, zooming in on every vehicle that passed through the surveillance zone. I was looking for anything out of place. A car that appeared at unusual times, a driver who seemed too aware of his surroundings, a vehicle with peculiar modifications. The green sedan was a phantom, but the unusual vehicle was real, and it was out there. A week passed. Mark continued his routine, but the subtle changes persisted. He'd glance longer at a red pickup truck, a silver SUV, even a bright yellow sports car that zoomed by. The green sedan, a figment of my imagination, was making him see cars. My misdirection was broadening his scope of observation, making him a better, if involuntary, data collector. Then, one Tuesday, something genuinely unusual happened. Not a green sedan, but a car that caught my eye immediately. It was an older model, a black Mercedes, meticulously maintained, but with a slight, almost imperceptible dent in the rear passenger door. It wasn't the dent that was unusual, but the fact that it parked directly across from Mark's house, stayed for precisely 7 minutes, and then drove off without anyone entering or exiting. The driver was a blur, obscured by tinted windows. I replayed the footage, zooming in. 7 minutes. No interaction. Just parked, then gone. It was too precise. Too deliberate. This was not a casual stop. This was a reconnaissance. Or a signal. My heart rate picked up. This felt different from the usual neighborhood traffic. This felt professional. And it wasn't green. I immediately cross-referenced the Mercedes. With every database I had access to. Nothing. No registered owner matching the vehicle description in that area. It was clean, or rather untraceable, through conventional means. This meant 2 things. Either it was stolen, or it was being used by someone who knew how to erase their digital footprint. My money was on the latter. I filed a preliminary report to the collective, detailing the black Mercedes. The modulated voice returned. _ Interesting. Continue to monitor. Is there any correlation with the target? _ Not yet. No direct interaction with Thorne. But the timing and location are suspicious. It parked directly across from Mark's residence. _ Understood. Keep us informed. _ The black Mercedes became my new obsession. It didn't reappear for 2 more days. But when it did, it was even more precise. This time, it parked a block down, closer to Thorne's house, but still within Mark's visual range if he were looking. Again, 7 minutes. Again, no visible interaction. This was a pattern, a potential dead drop signal. I needed to confirm if Mark had noticed it. My interaction with him had been designed to make him more receptive to anomalies, even if he didn't know why. The next day, I changed my approach slightly. I set up a new surveillance point, this time a small, almost invisible camera placed inside a discarded coffee cup near a bus stop bench, strategically positioned to capture Mark's face as he walked to his car. I wanted to see his eyes. That afternoon, as Mark pulled into his driveway, the black Mercedes was already there, parked in its original spot across the street. This time, as Mark got out of his blue sedan, he paused. His gaze, almost instinctively, went to the black Mercedes. He didn't stare, didn't seem alarmed. But he noticed it. The flicker in his eyes was unmistakable. He then glanced at his own blue car, almost as if comparing it to the black one, before heading inside. The green sedan had done its job. It had made Mark observant. Now the challenge was to decipher what he was observing. The collective's response to my footage of Mark noticing the Mercedes was swift. _Nightingale, your hypothesis appears to be confirmed. The target is being primed. So Mark isn't just a witness, I said, mostly to myself. But the microphone picked it up. He's a signal point. His routine, his visibility, his lack of suspicion, he is the perfect marker for a low-profile operation. The black Mercedes is likely a scout vehicle, establishing the timing and ensuring the area is clear for the actual exchange. My mind raced. If Mark was a marker, then the exchange would happen around him, possibly using his presence as a shield or a distraction. The green sedan was a double blind. It made Mark